Hi, I'm Tysus Jackson, and I'm your Conscious Giver in Chief. So welcome to the first live podcast of the Conscious Giver podcast. And I'm so excited to have Lamell McMorris with us. Yay! Oh, that was well deserved, and I didn't even tell them to do it. They were just like, yeah, Lamell. So let me tell you a little bit first about myself and this podcast. Just in case you're tuning in for the first time, we're actually launching our second season right now. So go back and listen to the episodes. It's all, anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you'll find the Conscious Giver podcast. So for nearly 2 decades, I've been fundraising. And one of the things that I always carried with me is that I always wanted more people who looked like me to be donors. So I always wanted to create seats at the table for us. And I feel very confident in saying that I did that with every single institution I've been with. And then the second part is that I wanted donors, regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, wherever they sat, to be able to come in and feel like they could contribute to the organization or what they're passionate about. And so that always sort of kind of formulated. So over time, I didn't really know exactly what to call it or anything like that, but I always say it's divine intervention, and then it became conscious giving. And when I thought about conscious giving, I thought about our guest today, Lamell McMorris. I know he's gonna laugh. Because when I first met Lamell, and actually in our audience is the other person that was with me, Jamil Fletcher, my colleague and I went to visit him for the first time. And Lamell said to us, I'm gonna look down I've gotta make sure that I quote this, but he's like, I love to work with organizations that are working with the toughest populations, you know, the ones that other people forget about. And so there was 2 points that I kind of got out of this, is that one is that he was very clear about where he liked to support, who and how he was going to do it. And that made me over the moon, because that was always what I love to do. And then 2, he also was saying, I'm not giving y'all money. So you agree with that? Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, that was true.
That's true.
But Jamil and I still walked away with this amazing respect for him. And we just wanted to know like who he was, more about it. And so he introduced me to a number of organizations. And recently, it just so happened, this is the power of social media, I was in Chicago visiting my best friend, and I'm on IG, and I see Lamell again making an incredible gift. And this one I thought was really special, because I feel like we kind of have a kindred spirit with our moms. Yes. So I have to say hi to my mom, because if she figured it out, she's actually watching live streams. So I hope she figured it out. But she already liked the page, so it should have just came up for her. But he gave to the STEM room and named it after his mother at the YWCA. And I like to say W because that's women's, because people forget there's a YWCA with a very distinct and important mission. So, I mean, I'm going back and I'm thinking about a lot of the work that you're doing, and I'm thinking about this gift that you made to the YWCA in your mom's honor in your home neighborhood. And I want you to dial back from all these amazing gifts that you've made over the last few decades, because you're too young. It hasn't been that long. It's a few decades. It's like, what was the first time, like you just said, I know that I can make a difference here. I can make an impact with being intentional with my work. So it's giving. So, you know, you may have been a kid and had like 2 pennies, or you had some time, but it's all about, you are so intentional about your work. I'm interested in kind of you recalling the first time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fascinating question. So I really don't know. Let me say this. Congratulations on the podcast. Thank you very much for having me here, but especially for doing it here at Healthy Babies. We deeply appreciate that, and we clearly want to expose the world to the great work that Healthy Babies is doing. I don't know. I like to think that it's centered around my faith, right? I just believe that to whom much is given, much is required. And so I've always been giving back in some form. Probably my giving started through service, through advocacy work. So I always tell people you can draw a line from my childhood to everything that I'm doing today. It may not necessarily be a straight line, but there is a line, and it really, at the heart of it, is advocacy, right? So I've always been the kid, the youngest, like her age or a little bit older, at the table with adults making decisions about something. And so when you're engaged in any form of activism, at the heart of that is giving, right? So that means I'm giving of time, giving of, clearly as a student, high school, college, I didn't have money to give, but at the heart of just being involved in issues, it just sparks, And so I think what I'm attempting to do now just represents another level of advocacy. So I learned along the way that, when you get engaged with certain organizations, it's one thing to be outside with, picket signs and rah, 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 and cheering, but there's another aspect to advocacy where you're actually at the table and doing work. And then coupled with that, you have to, the one thing you learn about nonprofits, like where we're sitting, is, faith and love and volunteerism is a big deal, but dinero and cash and money, because that's the only way organizations stay alive, to do the good work. And so I've decided along the way that, we're going to advocate policy and that, but we're also going to figure out how to actually keep organizations in business. And so I did not know until you mentioned it, what I said to you and Jamil. I'm not surprised by that. Well, one, because I'm a part of so many, blue chip type organizations that do get funding and do get recognition. So when you find someone like for real, like Regine, like, right here in the community doing the hard work. I've been in this room, the same room that we're in, with young people who I had to almost, bang on the floor to get to listen. So, I mean, like, this is the real deal. And, or Life Pieces, which I'm involved in, a group of young men, like, they don't get, a lot of recognition, but they're young men engaged in manhood training, arts, etc. Or, in Chicago, the Y, right? The YWCA is not, it is a more recognizable name, but you hit it right on the head. Yeah. The focus on women and children, and the fact that it's an organization in my neighborhood where I grew up, and the facility where we named the Technology and Innovation Center after my mom a few months ago actually sits across the street from my childhood home.
Oh, that's
And so, that makes it all the more real, right? What I've done in other places is great, but to be able to get it done at home. And then for everyone that's listening, I think the fundamental, one of the fundamental aspects of what I attempted to do with my mother, and really all of this is, someone told me a long time ago, the greatest sermon that we can preach is when you never open up your mouth, right? And so I'm subtly trying to message to a group of potential conscious givers or my peers, like, hey, we don't have to be billionaires and millionaires. Like, there are little baby steps we can do, right, to give back. And then the thing with my mom, I heard Oprah Winfrey, she spoke at Mrs. King's funeral. And she said something that I never forgot. She said, she stood up and she started speaking at the service, and she said, you know what? I'm actually happy today because I actually gave her roses while she was still here to smell it. Mm-hmm. I never forgot that. Yeah. And so, what symbolized what we did for my mother and what we all have an opportunity to do for any loved one in our life is, let's not always have, it doesn't always have to be at the end or, when they're gone, to dedicate, like, we can actually do stuff while people are living. Mm-hmm. And so I hope some people are inspired by, the work that we're trying to do.
It's funny that you said that about inspiring others, which is another part, eventually, what you want people to get to. So we want people with conscious giving to be intentional in how they give, because you can make a bigger impact with that. And but it's about inspiring others. People watch what you're doing. And so after we had that conversation, you told us about Life Pieces and Healthy Babies, and which I've been involved with both organizations since that conversation. And I'm not going to say which birthday, but it was a birthday that was a few years back when I happened to still be in a certain age group that I'm no longer not involved in that in the decade. Yeah, it must have been my 20s. So we had a fundraiser for Healthy Babies for my birthday, and it was great. And I mean, and so now all my friends know Healthy Babies just from that one moment. And what was so interesting is that I couldn't figure out why I felt this connection with Healthy Babies. Like, I was just like, oh, this is so great. And it wasn't that. It was founded by a Black woman. Its executive director is a Black woman. And it was helping women that were, that looked like me. So I was like, yeah, it's that, but what else is it? And then I realized it and shared the story on my birthday. But when my mother came home with me from the hospital, my father, who was an addict, had stole everything. So she came home to an empty house. And, I told you I was a wimp. But she came home to an empty house, and she had a baby. She had a 5-year-old, like my sister and I. And it was just like, what do I do? All the money she saved, because it wasn't at a time where, you had paid leave. She didn't, so she worked in the factory, and so she had saved money, and he found that money as well. And fortunately, they divorced when I was 3, so that happened. But that was, I think that's what it was. So it was spiritually connection, because, while I was just a baby, and I broke her tailbone. So I was hurt, I was black and blue, I was lighter than I am now, because you imagine a little baby all bruised up, and she's coming home with that and having to deal with, with the situation. So I think that you never know how people can connect and be a part of it. So I think it's great to be intentional with inspiring others. It's important.
I think for me, one of the consistencies, are children, right? Mm-hmm. So I believe that no society can claim that they're serious about their future if they don't focus on kids.
Right.
And so weave through everything that I'm doing, whether it's focus on young Black males or moms transitioning here, homeless teens in Miami that I work with. As a matter of fact, we're also LGBTQ. It's kids, right? And so how can you proclaim, no matter what you advocate for in your professional or public life or whatever laws, especially being here in DC, if at the heart of it children are not the focus, then how serious can you proclaim to be about the future, right? And so that's what we're trying to do.
So I'm going to stay on this subject again because we are at Healthy Babies Project, and it was important to me too, so to have it here. Yes. And I was like, I know the room. I think I have the setup. I was like, this will work out. I'm like, Regine, can we do it? So it was extremely important to me to do it here. But I mentioned about women, and less than 7% of foundation funding goes to women of color. So we know that we already have this issue. And so I remember in the previous location having a conversation with Regine, the executive director of Healthy Babies. And she was like, I really need to address this issue with our girls. She's like, they're having issues with their home life. They need some transitional housing. And I just sort of looked at her because my fundraising background, I was like, oh, really? So I was just like, okay, that's really ambitious, because DC is like #1 in the country for gentrification. It was expensive. And I always I don't really say anything, but then I kept thinking like, ooh, how can we get there? And then one day she's like, oh, we did it. And it's gonna be called the Perennial House. And I'm like, oh, Lamell, yeah. She's been talking to him about this. So I love to learn a little bit, talk to you a little bit more about working with specific organizations that are grassroots, because, we were talking about this and we're talking about this gender and race, but I have friends they're African Americans, and they really have a hard time on how to navigate small grassroots. And I always say you have to manage your expectations. It's different. You have to go in and be a conscious giver. So you have to be intentional. So you're not, because it's different when you're working with a grassroots organization. So tell me a little bit about, because I think that's one thing I want people to walk away from, is the high value with working with grassroots organizations, because oftentimes that's what our organizations, African American organizations, look like.
Yeah, so it's kind of the difference between writing the check and actually being here and leaning in. So I find that one, of course, is easier than the other, right? We all can write checks, but when you actually kind of learn about and get engaged, Regine, this is a good example. She came to the office a long time ago with a gentleman who was on her board and told me about the organization, and I said, great, but I gotta come here. I actually have to see what you do, because for me, that's one of the ways you're gonna pull me in. So then I walked in, I saw what was going on, and then I could actually, right, because because of my prior work, and being a product of an, urban environment and all that comes with it, I mean, the need, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you care enough and you want to make a different kind of impact, then you have to lean into some organizations that you may not necessarily have heard about, read about, didn't know, but somewhere in every community I've discovered there is a regime who doesn't get any recognition, right? Who is not clamoring for recognition, but actually, doing the stuff that doesn't fit, that's off the grid of the mission and the job requirements, like picking kids up, feeding them, taking them to school, make sure they're on time, going to get that from home, and so that's real stuff, and and so I mean, I want to foster that and make it, and I appreciate the kudos about where we are, but we got how many beds here?
We have 6 beds.
Yeah, so we have 6 beds here. Everyone listening, everyone in this room knows we need 6 times 6 times 6 beds. So, honored that it's named after my first firm here, but I submit that we haven't begun to even scratch the surface. So, I'm compelled to do more, because we need more facilities like this for women and children to transition, especially teen moms. And so this is great, but we got more work to do, right?
Right. It's really interesting, because that was the part I really wanted people to walk away with. But the second part as I was going out saying, I'm doing this podcast, or it's live, just to everyone. And I began to talk about you and send out information. And it was interesting, because the feedback I received back was about you going from this is actually really good. I think this might be a little mini master class for a second, but the conversation really led to this idea of, well, how did he sort of do this? So you started off with a very successful firm, like as you talked about, Perennial. And now you're at in your next phase 2. Like, it was cute. He's like, yeah, you've heard that a few times. And now Greenlining Realty USA, and you are very specific in saying that this is to do public good, and so that caught everyone's attention, because oftentimes you don't see people in a for-profit business intentionally saying, my mission is to do good. And so I'd love for you to kind of talk about that, because I really think that that's a word that a lot of, particularly even millennials and, are really trying to figure it out. I want to do good, and people call it we're being social entrepreneurs. But some people aren't trying to be social entrepreneurs. They're just trying to put it into their business model. So,
I don't want to oversimplify, and I don't want to, make it seem messianic, right? But there are people that come into our lives, and I've been very fortunate to have so many different mentors, and there's a gentleman, and I'm gonna call his name out. He is an elected official. He was a state senator in Houston at the time. He's a county commissioner in Houston. His name is Rodney Ellis. And I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, he looked at me and he said, you can do good and make money at the same time. Like a light kind of way, like they're not mutually exclusive, right? So, you know, again, weaved, I hope, throughout my journey thus far is, so, you know, I launched a government relations firm 17 years ago now in DC by the name of Perennial, which this house is named after. And then in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe the last 3, I decided, well, that has a mission and a mandate to represent various corporate entities and their public policy. I felt, you know, challenged, so I renamed the firm to Phase 2 because I feel like I've spent the first phase of my life working for success. Now I'm on the second phase of working for significance, right? And so then I went home in 2016 to Chicago, right? And I stood on the steps of my childhood home, 66 in Cottage Grove in Woodlawn, Chicago South Side, right? And I saw the same vacant lots and some of the same dilapidated buildings. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it myself. So I called up my best friend, Sean Harden, and I said, hey man, I need your help. And I'm gonna launch, and it goes, I think it goes to I appreciate your point about intentional. I don't even think about it, but it is. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna name this firm Green Line and Realty, going right at the historic practice of redline, which is one of the reasons why my neighborhood and other neighborhoods like it end up the way. And what we've done, you know, what I've learned in business is you have to be disciplined, right? Because it's easy to be kind of a gadfly. You can lose your focus, and especially in, you know, real estate development. So we're literally, what rappers are saying, buying back the block, right? Vacant lots, dilapidated buildings, rehabbing, new construction, commercial. But I'm only in one particular area. I go from 63rd to 71st, King Drive to Cottage. Folks are trying to get us to do stuff on other parts of the city, Chicago and other cities, until we demonstrate positive social transformation in that neighborhood, which happens to be the neighborhood I grew up. I'm not going anywhere else, right? Yeah. And so it has to be, it has to be that deliberate. I mean, if you really want to, because we're not trying to flip properties and speculate. Yeah. And so I guess I've tried to carry that ethic, very intentional, work here, right? Work in other cities is very intentional, but in Chicago, especially around the mission of greenlining, we have a very defined area. Because the temptation, especially in this area, is, it's a hot little property here, hot little area here. And then, by the way, it's not even so much about the economic returns on the property. It means the need, right? You want to go, while I'm on the south side where I grew up, there's a need on the west side. There's a need in Northeast DC. There's a need in Southwest Atlanta. There's a need in Watts in LA. But first, I want to demonstrate what we do in Chicago, and I think that can be a model for other places. And then, maybe I'll figure out by that time how to expand this place from 6 to 60 rooms with some of the skills, right? We learned by doing real estate development in Chicago.
Yeah. So you mentioned verbally a person that really impacted your life. Tell me a conscious giver that you can recall that just made another one that made a huge impact on who you are today.
That's a great question. A conscious giver who's made an impact.
Well, they probably don't know they're a conscious giver, but we just gonna.
Again, it's been so many. So I've been influenced by the men and women who took time out with me, right, as a kid growing up, and that's very deliberate, conscious giving, because the ability to allow me to go, to their office and not necessarily ask for anything, but just to questions. Half of it is, that's why I believe exposure for young people, right? Because half of it was, man, I saw a black woman, in her office sitting behind her desk. Then I know I can do that. I went down to this, black man's office, and he works for a corporate steel, it's like, man, I can do that. So the conscious giving was a result of the people who exposed themselves to me and thus created a model, right? And showed me a path so that if folks gave time to me, why would I not figure out ways to give back and do the same thing. And so that's what I've tried to do. There are way too many, and too many both known and unknown individuals. And I really mean that, who, I am a result of a whole lot of people. I mean, my family being one, but also like a community and a cloud of witnesses who've invested a lot of time. So it's really about just giving back and honoring the time and sacrifices so many people have made to me.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you get out of that one. That was smart, because he was like, I ain't naming no names. Nobody's gonna be mad at me. That's okay. That's okay. But it's true. It's really, it's hard, because one thing I love about living in DC, and this is sort of like the vision that I have for my life, I was like, I don't want to think that I have to move where just white people live my mom chose to live in a place where she knew we could get a good education. And I want people to be able to live in communities where they feel good, where, streets. So I love that my street is still economically, racially diverse. And it makes me feel good, because if someone says to me, hey, the guy across the street's talking about, can I borrow $5? Like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, because I'm like, ooh, you can't car wash right now. It's been raining for the last few days. So he's trying to eat. Or, or my neighbor's complaining because she's like, ooh, I want to redo my bathroom, and they're saying it's $20,000. So I have all of that in the same space, and I love it. And I also think that, and I hate the one thing we don't have is a lot of children on our street. Mm-hmm. So it's that community, like as you talked about, just being, when you see someone every day and you walk past, or you're watching them grow up, there is that connection. That's the one hard thing about like healthy babies. I'm like, ooh, if I don't get here before 3 o'clock, then it's gonna take me an hour to get back home, and I'm 2 miles away. So it's is there any places where you've seen where people have really started to build like community again? I kind of hear you, that's what y'all are trying to do with streamlining.
In a sense. So, I tell people all the time, ironically, with what I'm attempting to do in Chicago, I talk a lot about DC. Yeah. So for those of us who are here in DC, to me, one of the most remarkable transformations I've seen in the city is 8th Street. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's from a commercial standpoint and in the community, right? I mean, so you have now a place where no one hardly would go that's livable, walkable, and playable. Right. And when I look at neighborhoods like mine around the country, that's the fundamental difference. So my neighborhood in Chicago has all the bones of neighborhoods on the north side, mm-hmm. right? Here, where we are in Northeast and other places, has the same bones as Georgetown, right? Mm-hmm. The Upper East Side of New York has the same bones of some places in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Mm-hmm. So the difference is one place there was investment and another there's lack of investment. Right. So I don't know, tell me really good reasons beyond money and investment that this neighborhood can't be livable, walkable, and playable, just like the investment that's going on 8th Street, or why my neighborhood on Cottage Grove from 63rd to 67th Street can't be walkable like if I was downtown on the North Shore.
Right, exactly.
It's about how we see it. Mm-hmm. And then this whole notion of, you don't have to be in the hood in order to invest, to give back. No, I mean, because look, just as close as Mar-a-Lago is on Palm Beach Island, you go on the other side, and there's a hood in West Palm Beach too. Yes. So you don't have to be, it's not like you have to go searching for it. Right. Just as easy as we are here on Northeast, Georgetown is not that far away. Right. So I don't care where you live, there is a community of need and people who need help and to need to be serviced wherever you are. Yeah. So you don't have to be embedded in the hood in order to feel like compelled to give back. And no, you just go to where the need is. And unfortunately, in this country and in our society, the need is not that far from wherever we dwell.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So there's a couple things I want to do. Is one, on our podcast, we always ask questions. There's a group of questions. No, this is fun. This is
all
really
right,
fun.
Let's go for it.
Lighten the mood.
All right, let's go.
And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions from the audience, or if anyone wants to ask a question on Facebook Live, please post your questions now, and then we'll try to answer those. So this is actually fun. This is a fun question.
Okay.
So, is there because I know you like music and the dance. So tell me a song that is sort of, you might even say it's your theme song. I don't know, or something that turns your mood around when things get too heavy.
We have children here. I don't know if I can. No, I'm just kidding. You know who I'm a huge fan of, and I don't know if people would be surprised or if they even really, I hope they know this brother. Real music lovers will know this brother, Kim, K-E-M. And then I'm phenomenally inspired and moved by my sister, Avery Sunshine. And she sings a song that really gets me going, that is a reminder, on rough days, crazy days. She sings, in addition to the wonderful R&B vocals, she sings a gospel song, Blessing Me. And I don't know if, it's a traditional song that says the Lord is blessing me, but you need to hear her version of the song, Avery Sunshine. So that, I'm deeply moved by hip hop. I listen mostly to gospel though, to be honest. But I'm also a softie. So I'm a ballad guy, so I can sing any Luther, Babyface, Kim song that you have as well. So.
Okay, that's good.
And I do like to dance. I don't know how you knew that, but I do like to dance. Yeah.
Because there's a dance floor.
Yeah, I do
He's
like to dance.
I'm like, work is over now because
people, by the way, are surprised that I know how to dance for some reason. Like, what? I don't know if it's a suit or something that makes people think like I have rhythm. Like, I can actually do it. I'm just saying, like, that always shocks me. Like, people are like so surprised.
Like, you're from Chicago.
Right, thank you. You took the right.
I'm from the Midwest.
I was trying not to go there.
Yeah.
I was trying not to go there with all the, I'm from Chicago, of course, but that's really how people from Chicago feel.
Soul. Like, that's why I'm like, I always tell people, if I meet someone from the Midwest, which only includes Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, there's a certain energy that we have, and that includes being able to dance. Yeah. So I'll leave it at that.
Energy, that's a very diplomatic way of saying chip on our shoulder. Right, yeah. No, I hear you.
We all came up through the same railroad tracks from the South. So typically I ask this question, and sometimes it depends on how many zeros I put to it. But for you, Lamell, I'm going to put another 0 on it because this is the first time I've done this one.
Okay.
So if you were receiving right now $100 million, see, I had to add an extra 0 for him, $100 million, tell me what you're doing with it.
Wow. So the first thing I'm doing is putting it in some type of investment vehicle so that the 100 million grows, and whatever I'm doing, I'm using money off the 100 million. So that's number one. So I have I'm glad you asked that question. And so this is like one of those private things, right? So I have a vision board. And I keep that vision board, in my bathroom where I can see it every day. And on that vision board are probably 6 or 7 organizations that I feel like, I'm going to make a transformational gift, one that I've not done yet. And so those 7 organizations would receive, I don't want to say the exact dollar amount, but a gift that will totally transform and really allow them to endow the good work that they're doing, right? I probably, the bad thing is, Tysus, I will probably give most of the money away because, I like nice stuff, but I don't really need it. I like to eat well, and I need to be safe where I live. And other than that, I'm pretty cool. There's so many, really between the 7 organizations, and in the scheme of things, I think it's helpful for this conversation. I know $100 million may sound like a lot of money, but, my neighborhood, Woodlawn in Chicago, and other neighborhoods like it, $100 million is like the tip of the iceberg in order to be. And but then when you look at wealth in this country, you know, and especially some of the advantages to giving in certain communities and in certain ways, $100 million is very doable for a tremendous amount of people. And so all I know is I can tell you safely the bulk of it will be given away.
Okay. So when that happens, I want to help make sure your vision comes to reality.
Yeah.
That's my dream job. That's my dream job. It really is.
I appreciate that.
Just going ahead and sign it right now.
But you know what? I think it's consistent with what we're seeing. You know, there is a husband and wife couple. I won't call their name because they like to stay below the radar, but they're in Chicago and they're helping, and it's a family office that's helping us do our work. But we're seeing models of individuals like that who have really a mission and a mandate to give their wealth away.
Right.
They actually don't want their wealth to go beyond their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And so, and that, you know, you asked about 100 million. These are individuals who are giving billions away.
Right.
And so how great is that, right? I think the paradigm, though, and the opportunity that you're lifting up today is you don't have to look like, you know, other people in order to have that mindset to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like actually, you know, there are folks in our community and of color who also can have the same mandate and should also have the same goals. And it doesn't have to always be $100 million. I mean, give it away, you know, put a plan and a strategy in place to give it away, whatever it is, right? Sustain your living. I'm not saying don't take care of yourself and your family, but if you can incorporate into the trajectory of the end of our days here on this earth, some plan to give away your wealth and worth, why wouldn't you? Because what else are you going to do with it?
Right. Do you feel like that's the impact that you want to make? Your roses while you're still alive. Is that
until this conversation, I hadn't thought about even myself actually duplicating that. But I mean, why wouldn't I? I mean, what else would I do with it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's the fun part about doing this podcast and talking to people is that I can see them and I see what they're doing. I'm like, okay, they're a conscious giver. Like wherever they sit and how, you know, I'm watching them. That's why I do not take solicitations for, oh, put this person on the podcast. I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And it's always another step up. Someone always says, like, I didn't think about this. And I'm like, oh, you didn't think about yourself about, like, it's being intentional, but it's like it's so much a part of who you are that it's a couple like levels up, you know.
No, but I think what you're messaging in this podcast and by what you're doing is we all are conscious givers.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Or we all have the ability to be a conscious giver. And that's, to be able to spread that message is half the battle, especially to a group that probably historically we've not wrapped our arms around philanthropy in a meaningful way, right? Mm-hmm. So there's still, you know, for young ladies like these young ladies to, you know, to grow up and have in their mind, like, no matter what I do, I'm going to weave into my career, my ethic, my social life, my family life, giving back in whatever form that takes. If we can start doing that, where that's just embedded in who young people are, then I think we'll see a lot of change.
Yeah. I think sometimes even now when I think about healthy babies, one thing I always think about, and I never talk about it because we end up talking about, oh, this is going on, this is a need, or, you know, or it's something else specific. But I mean, the idea is that even a mother that went through this program now, like even the conversation or just being able to do, we talked about peer mentoring. I mean, all of that just is such an important role because we have to kind of support, and you know, it's like you said, sometimes it's just those everyday calls, or sometimes it's just saying, hey, you can do it today. You got this. You know, those are those moments that get you over that hump where you're like, ooh.
or just exposure. So, you know, we've brought the moms and the kids, right, to my office before. Not just coming here. We're here in D.C. this week during the Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Week. And so on Friday annually, we have an event. I've had some of the moms annually working at the table to be exposed and meet people who are coming in, these various influencers and stuff who are here for this event. So it's a lot of ways to make impact. It's not always, you know, money, time, exposure. There are a lot of ways to give back and to especially, give people another way to see themselves, right? And the potential for their lives. Half the battle is, when the thing that I'm really moved by when I look at, where I'm from in Chicago, especially the state of young black males, the question that I have to, put the mirror up before me and some of my friends is, well, if they don't see us, how do we expect them to be like us? Right? And so what the behavior that's perpetuated is because that's what they see on a regular basis. So I'll never forget, I'll tell a story, hopefully she may or may not be listening, but here in DC, there was a young lady I was dating, and she lived actually not far from here. It actually used to be probably, no kidding, the worst corner in DC, right? And I, here I am going to pick her up, take her out on a date. I got this cool little sport, I got, suit coming from the office. And I never felt like, the brothers, were, if what would happen, and listen to this, what would happen is they watch. They saw me get out the car, open up the door for her, or bring her back home. And when I would leave, they'd stop her and be like, hey, is that your boyfriend? What does he do? You think he can help me get a job?
Oh, wow.
The brothers were not conspiring to hurt me.
Right.
They were trying to figure out how to be like me.
There you go.
And so it hit me like, man, if these cats could see us, those of us, on a regular basis, and then perhaps we not see them as someone who's trying to do harm to us, then perhaps we can kind of close some of these gaps. And that's not a check, right? That's not a grant. That's not some legislation. That's like simple stuff that we can do. I call it the ministry of presence. Half the battle sometimes is not doing and saying and jumping up and down. Half the battle is being there. Because folks are watching you, especially young people her age. They're watching what you do, right?
It's so funny as you sort of talk, pull this all together and talk about it. I was, when you were describing going to neighborhood, I remember I was leaving Life Pieces, the Masterpieces, which is not far from here. Right. And I remember I was cutting through a neighborhood, it was the middle of the day, cutting through a neighborhood, didn't know where I was exactly, but I'm GPS, and something happened in this neighborhood, and there was some police out. They were looking at, I think they were looking for something or someone, and I remember the energy. I thought, dang, people have to every single day live like this. You can feel the energy. It's like it just brings your spirit down. That's why when we talk about in the health field, we talk about your environment and how it impacts your health, and I feel like it's the same spiritually affects you. So when you were describing that, it was sort of, I actually heard you, but I kind of felt like this low then high. You know what I mean? I could feel the energy between it as well. So that was a really great story.
We're seeing it, right? And so again, a lot of times it's not about shouting from the mountaintop, right? So, my buddy and I are the ones, and I told you one of my best friends from high school, he's the one that's helping me rebuild my neighborhood. So what's happening is they see us in my neighborhood, outside the houses that we're rehabbing. The neighbors are watching. The brothers are watching. They're looking like, and then, you have cats who walk in and they're like, well, man, this is you all are doing this? Man, they're like, that's really cool. All of a sudden, stuff that would have happened on other people's property, not necessarily happening on our property, right? Because there's some level of inspiration, right? Some level like, you know what? These brothers are at least trying to do, let us at least, so some of the stuff that's going on certain blocks that, that I know that I'm going to have to deal with, right? I'm going to have to have some conversations, but it's different than popping in a suit and cats haven't seen, at least they've seen what we've been doing, right? So it's not like I'm new, like coming like, hey man, I need you all to kind of be cool over here. It's like, oh, okay, you all the ones who over on 66 and then around the corner, all right, man, and then you slowly begin to eradicate the behavior. You got to minimize it, then slowly begin to eradicate it. But it's a process. And the thing that I think that's important, especially in this era of technology where you can hit a button and everything can happen so instantly. I think another thing that's important for those listening to your podcast to understand is these situations didn't happen overnight.
No.
So how do we think that we're going to affect the change that we're trying to seek overnight, right? I mean, I had the dilemma, because I'm used to like making stuff happen. And, you're trying to rebuild, and we have reentry workers that we're dealing with, and we're dealing with the city and it's like slow roll, and you have to just kind of, even I've had to kind of catch myself like, hey man, it's gonna get done, right? You're gonna transform your neighborhood, but it did not happen. It didn't get this way overnight. It's been decades, right, of neglect, et cetera. So take your time, and I think the message to some of your listeners is, don't get frustrated by the time it takes to do good and to see some of the change and impact.
So I kind of join you in the ranks of plant-based vegan eating, and,
Yes.
I remind myself of that all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's gonna kick in.
Yeah.
It's gonna kick in, but it's almost that discipline. Like you're right, and that's why we always say easy come, easy go. Yeah. So it comes too easy, too fast, then it's gonna go really easy and really fast. Yeah, no doubt. So the nice thing is that I know it's probably hard to slow it down.
Oh yeah, because you want this is the era we live in. I mean, we all have phones. We all have. I mean, we're used to instant, especially when you talk about the millennials that you and young people. Like, and then because the frustration sets in, right? Because if you don't see, like, okay, man, I've been toiling, and I don't see this there's a tendency to give up, or just, gadfly, pop over to something else. Like, nah, the part of the challenge is you gotta dig in and lean in and stay embedded and like work. It's work. Yeah. And it's hard work, right?
And that's a really good place, because going back to folks asking me about, how does that business part, they were, how do you kind of bring that in? And that's a great response to them. It's patience. Yeah. Having that vision, focus, and sometimes a lot of tenacity in some pieces, especially you say you're working with the city. Sometimes a lot of tenacity.
City, county, any government. Yeah.
Well, we're gonna actually open up to ask questions. So sorry, y'all, I was hogging up all the questions for a while. But does anyone here have a question that they want to ask? And this is Regine Ellie, who's executive director of Healthy Babies for how long has it?
Since 2007.
2007, so 12 years?
12 years, yes.
Proud Haitian.
Yes, that's right.
Ça passe.
But my question to you for young mothers that are watching, young
Yes.
single mothers, is there were seed thoughts that were planted in you by your mom, and how important is that in being a single parent and raising your son or your daughter?
You know what? Again, I don't even want to put all that on my mother, right? Because yes, she was my mom, and love is unconditional. But I had to keep referencing. My faith is important. There's a gospel song that says, and actually one of my other favorite groups sang it for the first time. I didn't really get it, but I get it now. They sang a song that said, "There's something within me I can't explain. All I know is I thank God for whatever it is. That something is within me." If my mom was sitting in this room right now, she would probably say, "You know what? Lamell told me what he was going to do. Like, he told me where he was going to college. He told me where," and so there's a little bit of, my aunts and my uncles and time spent with them and with adults and that village around and the stuff that just unconsciously, right, happens, and the stuff that a mom plants. But I think part of what a mother needs to understand is, like, don't put all that, create some other, examples and some other pillars. Don't feel like it's all on you. And a child will get just as much from a mom by the other positive figures that you put. So I would say to the moms, don't put all that pressure on you, because I think if my mom were here today, she would give just as much credit to my aunts, to my uncles, to my pastor, to the men and women who would pick me up and take me to lunch, whose offices I went to, who made sure I had certain introductions, certain internships. It was all that.
So if I'm understanding, you're saying it's about the connection and making sure to give opportunities and expose.
Yeah, I think subtly that's a lot of pressure to ask a mom, especially a mom that's already single, in some cases here transitioning, to say, yo, it's on you to impart all this stuff into your child. No, I think the opportunity is that the mom, yes, they have the chief burden, but to also be deliberate and conscious about seeking other people to put around the child to also help supplement some of the stuff that the mom shouldn't feel all the weight.
And thank you, because you've done that many times for us, and we definitely appreciate it. So
It's my pleasure.
And we'll transition. Does someone else have a question? Because while we're doing the mic, it's interesting that you said that, because when so I said that my mom worked in the factory, but she helped organize their union. So they were UAW, and so she had us out there when they were passing out flyers. And if you guys, it's a different era now, because now most people don't really value unions like they used to. But during that time period, just a little education, like, companies, you could lose your job. If you didn't win, you were out of there. So my mom put a lot on the line, but she brought us out there. Once she was in UAW, she was recording secretary of their PAC for their region, and secretary of the union, and she was secretary of the NAACP. I typed all her minutes. So I was an assistant secretary. And it's funny because I always jokingly say that I was her assistant secretary, but I know how to do minutes like no one's business.
Yeah.
I know all the Robert's Rule of Order. And it was just during that time. But she, one is that, she was doing a lot, but she knew that, this is good for me to have that experience and to learn and to be out there and do all the marches and the walks and those types of things. And it really did play a great, role in my life. So as you talk about that, I never thought about it to put it in that sense, but it really is how you're the single moms not carrying that burden and feel like it's a burden, but kind of spread it out in the community. So, yeah. So another question?
Hello, Lamell. This is Jamel Fletcher. How you doing, sir? Good to see you. There's a saying that the biggest, the gift of giving is the biggest reward, and you've sort of characterized much of how you've been fueled and influenced by the results of your giving. Can you give us, and you've given us some examples, can you talk about what sort of in your heart and your spirit that you receive from the impact of your giving?
You know what? Thank you for that question. I think it's directly connected to why I get such a great joy out of starting businesses, for example, right? I think it's that seeing something happen from nothing kind of is the motivation and inspiration. So, I count it a phenomenal blessing to be sitting here 17 years later in the city that I, kind of rolled into and open up an office with no staff, no clients, and no furniture, right? And so it's the same thing, right? To be able to look 5-10 years down the line in my neighborhood as I'm driving around and say, you know what? Look what we did, right? We actually have placed our handprint, and where there was a vacant lot, right? There is a new home. Where there was a blighted and crack addicted and drug infested and prostitution run, dilapidated building, right? It's now a single family home with a thriving family living in it. At this school down the street, which was the grammar school I went to, look at this garden that these kids are growing fresh food in. And so the reward is seeing a situation today and what it is, and then talk to me about 5 or 10 years later, and then I'll be able to show you the reward.
Yeah, sitting in it. Sitting in it. Another question?
Good afternoon.
Hello, sir.
John Borders IV. Excited to be here with you. Question is kind of twofold. You mentioned 7 different institutions that you had a desire to make a large gift to, at least 7. What is the commonality between those, or some of those ideas in your mind that help to differentiate these institutions from others that may be similar in mission? That's one question. Then the second would be, as you identify those that you mentor, what are some of the common threads between those that you invest your time and energy and effort into?
Great question. So let me go to the first one, and I said it earlier. No society or group of people can claim that they're serious about their future if there's no focus on children. And so if you look, and when I think about those 7+ organizations that if I had $100 million, I would make a transformative gift to, all of them, at the heart of them are young people, right? On your second question around, I'm fortunate. I have a lot of young people. My mom teases me. I don't have my own kids, but I have a whole bunch of kids, right, around, whether they're college students or high school students or now going on as elected officials. Let me tell you the common theme. It's the same. I look for the same thing that I did. If you bug me, if you are deliberate and intentional about reaching out, I promise you I'll reach back. That's what I've said to any group of young people, including the group of young people that I spoke to here in this room, right? Now I give you my number, I give you my email address, etc. Now it's on you. And I promise, if you reach, I'll reach back, because that's what I did. Most of my mentors, they actually didn't grab me. If they was here, they'd be like, "No, he bugged the hell out of, out of us." And so that's the deal. And so I'm more than happy to reciprocate when folks. And so there's no criteria. You don't have to go on. You don't have to be a Morehouse alum, although most people may think that, to think that I'm going to mentor you, or you don't have to. No, just reach out, and I promise you I'm gonna reach back, because that's what folks did for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I was thinking about it. I was like, I've known you for like a decade now. I was like, oh my gosh. And I always, even if we haven't talked for a while, now that you're not in DC all the time, Lamell he always reaches back, always is a yes person, and I'm going to make it happen. So I just want to kind of co-sign onto that, because it is sort of, I think you have to see people like that, because most of the time when people get to a certain level, they don't respond back as much, or they that into, I got too much going on. And I've noticed that you've never wavered or changed in any way. And so I think that is, for me, has been something that I want to kind of keep emulating as well. Even I jokingly, I went to Lamell's office one day and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have this idea. And I didn't even know what I was talking about at that point. But I was just like, I'm like, maybe there's something that's going to happen from this conversation. I was just trying to figure it out. So this is a part of the manifestation of that. But the reason why I actually went to him was because I understood well what your values were, and the type of person you were. And I said, so even if I come in and talk crazy talk, at least I know that, there's going to be something I'll take from it, And so I think that's a great advice, is just to not let fear stop us. And oftentimes we almost sabotage ourselves because we think, but I would say you are worthy of that happening. And so I might know I kept this on this table because I felt like it was worthy of this conversation. But I used to work at Virginia Tech, and I was, at that point, I wasn't working in a college where Nikki Giovanni was, but kind of knew her, and we were starting this scholarship program, and I was like, I'm just going to ask Nikki to do something for it, because these people are stepping out. They're giving, it was just to get people small gifts to support diversity. I was like, I'm just going to get people going. And I wanted to send them something inspirational that they knew the value of their gift. So I just thought I would just ask one of the best and poets in the United States to say, hey, or in the world, hey, can you write a poem for our program? And Nikki did that for us. And so I keep it around. I usually keep it in my office. Now it's in my room, because I'm like, it kind of reminds me of that moment. It's just stepping out and asking someone, and there's people who are conscious givers and they will give. So she just gave us a gift of her poetry, and it was amazing. And these people, and at that point, all of those donors was like, oh, ooh, this is important. Nikki wrote a poem for it. So it was really cool. Is any other questions? Okay. Oh, Jasmine, go ahead.
Hello. I just thought it was super touching when you talked about the power of presence. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, this young generation is not recognizing. What would be some words that you would say to motivate them? I mean, I understand because I see it. I mean, I see you here. You are in here, and like you said, stump your feet to get them to listen. That is real. But definitely motivating like young entrepreneurs and other some of our moms and dads that want to be so successful as you are. How would you instill in them the presence?
So, again, I don't want to romanticize, especially where we are in this era, especially with young people, right? Whether we like it or not, the things that are put before young people on social media, music, culturally, are materials, right? I mean, if we walked out down the street, cats probably couldn't tell me a whole lot of stuff, but they could tell me how much money, Jay-Z is worth, and so the point I made earlier, and I say that because, and it pains me to say this, so I don't want, if we can close the gap between this message of doing well, making money and doing good simultaneously, I think that's our greatest opportunity with this generation, because unfortunately, we're not going to be able to eradicate the bling. The bling is here, and it's here to stay, and they're going after it because that's what's put in their face. I need a Bentley, I need a Rolex, I need and so if we submit that we've almost already lost that battle, then let's at least attach the good to it. So the models that we can put before them are, the individuals who are getting the bling, but yet doing good. So that's why I like the whole the rappers kind of buying back the block, because they over promote the material, but if I can get if a young person is moved by Rick Ross and his rhymes, then let me show you how Rick Ross is buying back his neighborhood and setting up businesses. So if you're so crazy about T.I., well, let me show you about what he's doing in Atlanta and et cetera. So if you think Beyonce is so great, well, let me tell you how, or you think Jay-Z is so, then so that's our greatest opportunity, because we have to be honest about where we are. I think we've lost, from a value standpoint, I'm not saying we've lost a generation, but we certainly lost them to the bling and the quest and the desire for material wealth and possessions. So if we can connect somehow the material wealth and possessions to the ability to still do good and put up organizations like Healthy Babies and Life Pieces and Buy Back Your Block and Give Back, then I think we'll kind of turn that tide.
Great, thank you. So I think we're finished with questions, but I think that one of the things I want to be really intentional in doing is to have guests that are in different sectors doing different things in order for them to show. Now I can articulate what that is a lot more, is so that they can sort of see, people can see themselves and say, yeah, I'm interested in politics, and this is how I can really affect and make change. So Lamell, I don't know. I mean, there's lots of words to say thank you, but I really deeply just want to say thank you and want to continue to pray for you and everything that you're doing, because you've been a wonderful conscious giver and have given to so many people. And I want to thank Regine. I was happy you talked about it. I was going to save it for last, but and Jasmine and everyone that's here from Healthy Babies, because we really believe in you and the work that you're doing. And as a fundraiser, I got to say, make sure you ask more. I know it gets busy. As an executive director of an organization, it gets really busy. But if you don't ask, you don't get. Knock and you shall seek. So that is what I just want to say. Thank you so much, and we'll keep y'all uplifted in prayer too, because I know it gets hard. It gets hard. So thank you for everyone that's coming out. We have a great team that has helped produce this, and please encourage others to watch this amazing podcast with Lamell, because I really think it's going to transform a few people, and they're going to start looking in some places and changing how they're doing things. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.